All right, welcome back for another episode of the Unplanned Show. With me today, Jamie Vernon is going to be talking about building and sustaining a culture of automation. Jamie, feel free to say hello.
Hi, everybody. Hi, I'm Jamie Vernon. Been in IT for 23 something years, executive level roles for the last 8, almost 9, and glad to be here talking about automation and how to create a culture of change for you and your team.
I think that culture of change is such a powerful aspect of all of the technology innovation that you hear about. Then it comes to how you actually change. So I'm really excited to dig into it today. Before we get fully into the topic at hand, just to quickly um, cover what we've got coming up on the show. Today talking about a culture of automation. We will not be having a show next week, November 27th, following up on the US Thanksgiving holiday and then going straight into reInvent, taking a quick break. But we'll be back on December 4th. We'll have Arturo Suarez Martin talking about PagerDuty's own journey around CS ops, customer service operations. Some new insights I learned about recently that wanted to get him on the show to share more. Then we'll have Jeff Susna talking about platform engineering. And then our last live episode of 2023, we'll have Todd Whitney on talking about no maintenance window updates, I guess is the best way to summarize it. He gave a great talk at HashiConf, and I was catching up on it recently and said this would be such a great topic, especially going into the end of the year when you've got code freezes and things like that. And it, for some reason, felt like an appropriate topic. So without further ado, let's get into it. Jamie, tell me a little bit about how you kind of started on this journey that led you to having to develop a culture of automation.
So for years, I've described myself as professionally lazy, not wanting to do stuff by hand, not wanting to do it manually 3 or 4 or 5 times. And so I've always been looking for a way to script this or automate that. But the story that we're going to be talking about a lot today actually came up at my previous company, Results CX, contact center company with 22,000 or so employees around the world. And I was told we got to scale the business, but I don't get to necessarily scale the team. What are the things that we can do to help support a growth in revenue, a growth in network space, but not necessarily have to hire? As anybody knows, it can take a while to hire somebody, and it's a cost that you got to carry, and it's a risk. And so when organizations are far more interested in buying solutions or software or platforms, that's the direction that we went. And I actually got on a customer board, advisory board with the PagerDuty marketing team, and we were talking about automation and other things like that. And I asked the question of the other companies that were there, who here took that first step? Because it's often been a challenge with engineers. You say, hey, we're going to automate stuff, whether that's code releases or network changes or server builds or what have you. And one of the most common responses is, you're asking me to script myself out of a job.
Mm.
And so I was wrestling with how to present this to my team. I wanted a little bit of an affirmation of whether I was going down the right path. And it turns out that nobody on that call had been there when their company took that first step. And I said, well, for what it's worth, here's what we're doing. And when it was done, I got reached out to by Greg Chase from PagerDuty. He said, that's a really cool story. Could we possibly talk you into doing a presentation for PagerDuty Summit? And so last summer, I did a recorded session on PagerDuty Summit on building a culture of automation. And, you may do it any of a dozen ways, but the approach that we took was, I don't get to hire anybody, but let's pretend that we did. Let's start automating some of those tasks that we pump off to a junior resource, whether that is switching a network interface from this VLAN to that one, or restarting a Windows service, or cleaning off temp disk space, whatever it might be. The sorts of stuff that engineers who've been doing it for a while, they don't grow. That's literally the conversation I had with some of the team, which is, how many times have you built a VM? I don't know, a couple thousand. Do you grow as a professional if you build another one? Do you learn something? Typically, the answer is no. We still have all these routine tasks that nobody really wants to do. We'd love to have a junior employee, a rookie, and so we created this approach to automation of we've hired a rookie, and we went all in. We came up with a name. We called her Rita for Results IT Automation. We gave her an icon in Teams and an email. And we even set up some email listeners so people could email Rita and ask for a thing. And we didn't talk about writing a script to do a thing. We talked about training Rita to do a thing. We did everything we possibly could to anthropomorphize, to humanize automation as this junior employee. And that's how we got everybody going on it.
And that to me is just, in some ways it's surprising, right? And then you think about it and you realize it makes sense. Coming back to sort of just how things started with needing to scale the business, but not being able to scale the team. That's obviously a really familiar refrain that's probably become even more true for more organizations in the last year or two. And as everyone's trying to figure out how do they grow revenue while with their current capacity. So just thinking about, you had started down this path of thinking about like how to get folks on board so they're not threatened by taking on automation and starting with the small stuff. What were some of the initial learnings there, just with let's take on these junior tasks, the really mundane thing? What kinds of things did you learn at that point about what works and what doesn't, and how does the team starting to get their heads around it?
So I'm gonna start with a quote. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, who's the author of The Little Prince, a book we all read back in grade school, and it was older when we did it anyway. But one of the things that he said was, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. I didn't want to present this as a mandate. We are going to automate this, that, and the other. That's an excellent way to get people to push back. I've said it for years and at multiple companies. It's a very clever team. And part of how I know they're clever is they don't give me a password to anything. I was never going to introduce automation by myself. I was never going to be successful because on top of having my own job responsibilities, I didn't have the access to script this process or that function. And so I had to get them on board. And so the way I got them on board is to basically sell them on the adventure. We're going on an adventure. We're going to automate this. We're going to get rid of the stuff that we don't want to do. In doing so, we're going to build new technical skills. And if you want to help it be successful, there's a place for you on the ship. Because people said, hey, I'm worried that you're going to script me out of a job. And I said, yeah, I am going to script you out of this job. But I'm going to ask you to do it. And you're going to be building yourself a new job with far more modern, more advanced skills. You're going to have practice building up the leadership of setting an example and bringing others along. And in doing so, if you should decide to leave these hallowed halls, if you had enough of me as your team lead, then when you go someplace else, you're going to be that much more valuable, that much more attractive an employee, a leader. And coupled with the opportunity to get rid of the things they didn't really necessarily enjoy about their day-to-day anyway, that approach was very successful.
So oftentimes you hear about making changes in an organization. There's sort of the rule of thumb is that you'll have, call it a third that are really excited, jump on board right away, and they're ready to adopt change. A third that are kind of not really sure, and then a third that are digging in their heels. And those are obviously real rough. But
Sure.
did you experience that kind of spectrum, and how did you sort of treat the different groups to lead them on the adventure as opposed to just giving a mandate?
Step one, I found it was really necessary to lean on the previous 3 years. Um, just building up a culture of trust and mutual respect. Was there some pushback? Was there some heel dragging? Absolutely. But I'd already built up enough goodwill with the rest of the teams. I had, done this, that, and the other, been on outage bridges with them, things like that, where those 3/3 that you talked about were already swayed in my favor.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some people who flat out refused. There are some people who I said, "Hey, go off and do the thing," and they do it the old way, and that was fine for them. But eventually, those tasks became the lowest hanging fruit. Those tasks that they were doing by hand were the ones that somebody else automated.
Mm.
And then this person said, "Well, what do I do now?" And I said, "You do it this way, because we don't need to do it that way, because it supports audit functions, it supports change control, it supports all these other things. Doing it the old way is no longer allowed." And when they saw people getting their day back, when they saw people getting an opportunity to be engaged in higher value projects and higher value efforts, when they saw how easy it was for them using the processes that somebody else scripted through Rundeck, the pushback basically went down to zero. I'm thankful, frankly, that nobody pushed back so hard that we had to have conversations around whether or not they had a home run team at all.
Mm.
I'm thankful that everybody got on board when they could still be part of this new initiative. And sticking to the ship analogy, eventually the ship starts to sail a little bit. And the gap between where you are doing things manually and doing things in the new world gets a little bit tougher, a little bit longer. And when everything potentially is being automated and run through these processes and not done by hand, if you don't already know how to run the script and check the outputs and do the things, there can come a point when it's impossible for you to catch up. And like I said, I'm genuinely thankful that everybody got on board with the idea. Everybody got on the ship as we were building it. So I didn't have to have conversations like, Bob's not going to be coming with us anymore because we don't need Bob anymore. And he lacks the skills that everybody else here has developed.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, and that's an interesting insight into that kind of, hey, this is the next phase of the journey of what happens. And as you said, it's fortunate you didn't have to kind of navigate that extra, call it rocky shore, as you're exiting the harbor, so to speak. So I want to, and I, by the way, I posted in the chat for folks a link to the recording from your talk from about 18 months ago. And there's just so many great insights in there. I've referred back to it so many times. Some,
Thank you.
details that you've provided around, how to kind of find the right size jobs, particularly in the beginning, a lot of those anthropomorphizing examples that you shared. And just also kind of breaking things down, not only for the team, but also then, executives. But I realized, it's been 18 months since you shared that out. And if we're kind of coming back to the ship analogy, if we're now sort of, hey, we're out of the harbor and things are sailing, how do you sustain that culture? Have you hey, we've raised the waterline, we've automated a bunch of things. Does it keep going? Does the pace of finding more and more things to automate, or do you kind of end up sort of at a point where well, we've automated really what we can for now, what happens along the way? Like that either keeps it going, or do you have to sort of steady state for a while?
Um, Part of what we did was we looked outside of IT operations for other organizations that we could support. As an example, we partnered with our security team. So Results had a security platform, CrowdStrike, and it would throw an alert if somebody's account was doing suspicious things, however it defined that for that person. And in the olden days, we'd have to go find somebody with access to Active Directory. We'd have to go lock down that account. Did they do it right? Did they change the password? Did they disable it? What they do? Oh, they did it all wrong. And then we got to go back and figure out what that person was doing and wake some people up. And we automated that. And so we had a standard process for disabling somebody's account. And then we created a PagerDuty alert, frankly, woke some people up. It was fun. That, Jamie's account is being used for suspicious activity. We were very careful not to frame it as Jamie's doing some weird things, because my account could have been stolen, could have been compromised. It wasn't necessarily me. But what that allowed us to do was to further protect our logical edge from bad actors. And yes, the alarm went off a couple times, and yes, we were thankful that we had an automated process rather than hoping that somebody was awake to catch the alert. And so that allowed us a much faster response to make sure that our infrastructure was protected. Another thing that we did, we called it the big red button. That was an emergency thing that HR could do in case somebody needed to be, terminated from their company for whatever reason. And this was a particular person of interest, an executive with, a big email account or whatever it was. And so there was a great instance where the head of HR reached out to the CIO, who reached out to me, who reached out to three other people because it was 10 o'clock on a Friday night. Hey, we needed to disable this person's account. And normally during these circumstances, you want a little bit of discretion. You want to be able to control the narrative. And in that instance, like 12 people knew before the action was actually taken that so and so was no longer around. And so by setting up the big red button, which was an email address where HR, and it was a limited number of people, could send a, you know, bob.johnson at results. It allowed us to more quickly execute to a much smaller audience and allow HR an opportunity to manage the story, manage the process a lot better. And so while neither of those instances, or the security or the HR, are technically complicated, we took it to the business and made it part of their story too. And that's part of how we continue to build relevance for IT teams, no matter where they are, because they're in a position to build these relationships, to build these capabilities, and be seen as part of our story of success. Do we automate more and more complicated tasks? Absolutely. Is the outreach critical? Absolutely.
So coming back to even the original question about scaling the business
Mhm.
while keeping the team and the resources at the same size, what ultimately were you able to accomplish toward from that goal, right? There's so much building and change management involved, and yet that's kind of the mandate that you're given.
Mhm.
How did you do against that goal?
We did very well. We were able to handle requests automated that, used to be people got mad that we weren't on call 24/7 for this sort of thing. And so we were able to accelerate the business in small successes, not necessarily the huge wins that you necessarily want for a press release, but all sorts of different ways where we had an employee satisfaction survey and it said that IT was operating better than it ever had before, partially because we were able to accommodate these requests where we weren't able to. These little day-to-day tasks, exactly the sort of thing you'd want a junior employee named Rita to handle for you. And by handling it this way, small daily wins, just hitting singles every day, not necessarily swinging for the fences, Just small wins, repeatable, expandable.
I think that idea of kind of the hitting the singles every day, to pick up on that analogy, reminds me a lot of just anything, even with managing, say, your tech debt, right? And you want to build up test coverage on your code, like whatever it is you're trying to do. You, a wise man once said, "You don't get to park $1 million in your bank on the first day. You've got to deposit $1 a day or whatever it is, and let it grow and build interest." And so what I'm hearing is kind of this, the culture of automation allows you to sort of, it's like having that healthy habit, right? Of putting money in the bank with every paycheck as opposed to spending it all. Um, you kind of, you're building that up across the team. What is it like if you do have, attrition and then new people joining, and they weren't part of that initial transition? And I don't know if this occurred, but so they didn't meet Rita on day one. They joined the team and Rita was already there.
Yep.
What's that like?
It can be a little bit of a culture shock, especially since you're talking about people who maybe never had automation before. If they did, it was over there. They didn't get to touch it, they didn't get to build it, they didn't get to expand it. But, new ideas, new approaches, new opportunities for improvement can come from anywhere. And so we made it part of our onboarding, especially if you're part of the network operations team, that part of your responsibility is to check to make sure that the Rita scripts are running properly. And if they weren't, look for opportunities to update them. It's a bridge between managing the network directly and learning how to build stuff for Rita. And that enabled them to get used to the water, as it were, and start to get comfortable with the idea of some things are done over here, some things are done over there. And the more we can move from here to there, the better off we all are. And so that's how we brought people in. They spent some time teaching Rita, updating the skill sets, and making sure that those things still worked and were still relevant.
So just making sure I understand that, right? Like, new person joins the team and part of their onboarding is
Mhm.
they go check the scripts, Rita's existing scripts, and
Yep.
just validate that they're working well, but that gives them an opportunity to, like, you know, just familiarize themselves with, this is how Rita works.
Mhm.
And this is, you know, if you find something, then we're going to improve. That's an immediate win, an opportunity for that new hire to improve something. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. And so, okay. Um, that that makes a lot of sense. How quickly was that kind of part of their onboarding? Is that a day one, a week one, or a month one type of activity?
Well, I mean, you got to do the normal stuff for employee orientation. Here's your email address. Here's the apps. Here's your security training. But once they're ready for their regular role, that was the job. And it wasn't necessarily that the script itself failed, but maybe a firewall upgraded from version X to version X.1, and that caused this command or that flag or whatever it is to fail. By going back and looking at the execution success rate in Rundeck, we could say, hey, this one's failing. Hey, new person, let's go figure out why. And that allowed them an opportunity to understand what had been automated, dig into the error codes like they would if they were working normally, and then apply what they knew about that firewall or that database to update the script accordingly. And once it ran successfully for a while, we got to move on. And that's how they got integrated.
Okay. Um, so I want to put a term in front of you
Okay.
and just kind of hear your reaction in terms of, this makes sense. So sometimes we'll talk a little bit about having an automation first approach, right? Which is,
Mhm.
if we can figure out how to do this in an automated way from day one, um, obviously you've got usually a backlog of the tasks, right? The stuff you mentioned is like, these were the low hanging fruit that we started with. But does that kind of automate, do you get to the point where you're like, we're now operating at automation first, which is maybe anything new that comes in, we look at it as, let's see if we can do this in an automated way? Or do you kind of need to sort of see if something is worth automating? Like, this needs to be happening on some kind of recurring basis. What's the sort of balance between?
So in the PagerDuty Summit that you posted the link to, I laid out rough calculus of how risky the task is. If this goes poorly, does the company come down? How complicated the task is? Is it 1,000 steps? Is it 5? And how many technologies are involved? Is it network, or is it network and server and storage and firewall? And that's how we look at candidacy for automation. It was never about whether or not the automation could work, because there are lots of enterprise class automation platforms out there. Rundeck is one of many, but it's certainly the one that we standardized on. And so it's not about whether or not automation itself is an untrusted philosophy or a technology or architecture. It was about our own skill sets and making sure that we continue to create confidence within ourselves and within our stakeholders.
Mhm.
And so we stuck to that calculus pretty tight. Not whether or not something could be automated, but were we organizationally ready for it to be automated?
Okay. I think that's a really good point about building trust. And it's something that bridges also to this other really hot topic of the day, right? Around AI, which in
Mhm.
some ways you could say is just a very sophisticated form of automation, right? Um, uh, but it's also one that there's a lot of trust building that has to go into getting to the point where you can confidently hand something over. Um, Thank you for reminding me about the calculus. I do remember that now, and it's helpful to know that that was something that was used continuously, right, as part of this whole journey of building the ship and getting it to sail on the adventure. That wasn't like a fleeting part of the job.
No, that's far more of a touchstone. Again, going back to the rookie employee, they said they're ready to do the thing. Are we ready to trust them with that task? And I honestly, to your point, I think the same thing about artificial intelligence. Um, there's a joke that's been rolling around the internet for a while. Uh, why aren't we automating CEOs? They're thousands of times the cost of an average employee. That seems like they'd be ripe for it. Part of the challenge with artificial intelligence, proper artificial intelligence, is it is artificial intelligence. Going back to my background in customer service, I've been in the BPO space for far many more years than I haven't, and you learn about technology and empathy. And Dr. Keaton from I've worked with him for years now. Dr. James Keaton, he's studied human communication, um, Northern Colorado, and he talks about how chatbots shouldn't attempt to communicate empathy because they cannot do so authentically.
Mm.
Chatbot shouldn't ever apologize for, you got the wrong pizza because it doesn't know what it's like to get the wrong pizza or to miss the flight or to have gotten the wrong order. It can apologize on behalf of the company, but it can't say, I know what that's like. You and I can know what that's like to have gotten the wrong pizza. Similarly, I think artificial intelligence is great for guiding decisions. It can do the math. It can say this one has a better chance of success, things like that. One thing that I haven't yet seen artificial intelligence show the capacity for is to inspire others. Um, it would be an interesting thing for artificial intelligence, no matter how it communicates, whether through a chatbot or through an animation on screen. It'd be an interesting thing to watch it deliver a rousing speech with authenticity. and have people respond like they do to a human leader. And so I think artificial intelligence is going to be, like I said, great for decision making, great for human support in leadership roles, and might even take over a healthy chunk of leadership tasks, budgeting and performance reviews and other things, and deliver them for a human to sign off on. But I don't know that an artificial intelligence will ever be able to inspire in a team the yearning for the vast and endless sea, as it were.
Mm. Well, so where are your sales headed next? To just key off of that analogy again.
um, I have since left results, and so now I'm working with other companies who are looking for change leaders, looking for assistance with how to not necessarily introduce automation, but how to introduce change within their own organizations and how to get their teams to come along. And so I'm having a lot of those conversations, and it's fun because 20 years ago, I would have looked up at senior executives and thought that they knew all the things in the world and they had it all dialed in. And it's just they need a different kind of help, and I'm here to help offer that help.
Yeah, and you've got just a tremendous experience with even just this small window that we're looking at around building this culture of automation, which hits exactly at what so many organizations need. And I think also realizing how much room there is to go on a similar journey, but how do you get started? And so you've answered a lot of really great questions and hopefully inspired many people today to think about how they're going to rally their teams, paint a vision for them, and know that it is possible and it can absolutely have an impact. But what it's going to look like is it's going to look like hitting singles every day and building up that sort of trust and credibility and skill sets. So I thank you. Any kind of final parting thoughts you want to share?
People want to grow. I mean, yes, there's always exceptions, but generally speaking, especially in IT, people get into IT because it's dynamic, it's changing every day. There's new technologies, there's new directions in those technologies. There's a lot to learn here. And so if you help people understand that you're here to help them grow, you can move mountains. You can build that ship, you can go on that adventure. You do have to establish that basis of trust that you're there to help, that you're there to help them achieve what they want to achieve. But once you've done that and you've set a direction, you said, here's how we're going to get there. Now let's all go do these things. I think people are looking to amaze. People are looking to create wonder. And if you let them, they will.
Love it. I think that's a great thought to leave folks with, especially this week here in the US, Thanksgiving, and just that time of reflection and remembering that those are great. That's a great sort of mantra of, people are looking to amaze. And so I love the idea of what you're describing in terms of giving people that opportunity. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving to you, to everyone who's been joining us today. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks back here on the Unplanned Show.
Thank you. I appreciate it.